So guys, we got the opportunity, maybe like late afternoon when we got those 4 words. Trae Young is available. So we learned that after 6 weeks of waiting, Maria 11 finally returned and had a solid night with 11 points, 13 points, 11 assists, 4 rebounds. So that in 21 minutes, obviously on a minute restriction coming back from that torn ligament in his left pinky finger. But when you see him out there on the court, even we'll talk a little bit about that starting lineup, if you will. What did you learn more so when he comes back? You kind of get reflective. What did you learn more so about who the Hawks were without Trae versus maybe who they have been with him?
First of all, how much did it pain you to say play-in time in Atlanta?
Again.
I'm sorry. I had to go there. I'm so sorry. Back to your question. Chaos. My bad. I was like, oh, she's struggling through that right now.
Struggling.
Yeah, but I thought it was nice to see Trae back, honestly. And I thought that he was great afterwards, and what he was saying was he was so reflective on his time, and he was actually asked what he learned about the team, and some of the things that he thought they were working on prior to his departure, they've gotten a lot better at. And to me, what I learned is that this team can be coached really well. And I learned that they can step up in a variety of ways, because it wasn't just Trae that was missing, as we know, and we're going to talk about a little bit more. There's been several different injuries, but Trae's absence, I think, showed me that there are multiple guys who can step up in those holes and create opportunities for themselves we wouldn't have otherwise seen. So that's what I had said a couple weeks ago too, is there's been some players that you look at maybe a little differently now because they wouldn't have gotten those opportunities had Trae been there. I think it's a great opportunity for this front office, because now they get to learn, hey, what pieces are we going to have now? And then what are we going to move on from? And they wouldn't have gotten that sample size had Trae been there. And February 23rd to now is a long gap of time to figure something out. You have enough of a sample size to figure out what this should look like in the future. And so to me, that's what I learned. And I also learned that this group is bizarre in a lot of ways.
Yeah, bizarre is definitely the word for this time with Trae Young being out, because when you think about what DeAndre Hunter was drafted here to do, right? A number 4 overall pick. You expect him to be that starter, a guy you can lock in as a 3-and-D guy, but when Trae being out, we turned out, hey, this dude might be the guy to come off the bench for you. He can give you some scoring off the bench, take advantage of some matchups in those second rotations and around the NBA, right? We saw him do that pretty consistently. And another thing I feel like that Trae probably, I'm gonna make a big assumption here that he learned while he was out. He was like, hey, I can kind of trust these guys, because I never forget the look on his face last night when he passed the ball to Garrison Mathews. He doggone spotted up that bad boy, whoop, all net. And Trae was like, oh, okay, all right, cool. Yeah, that's another dime for me. I can trust you to shoot the rock, right? And then you even saw Trae giving the ball up to Bogdanovich. Him kind of going on the screen, and then Clint Capella setting the screen, and Bo finding him on the wing for the 3-point shot in the corner. So all that type of stuff is just like, all right, I could play off ball, and I could trust my teammates to hit the shot without me having to, exert all that energy, and I can kind of wait till the fourth quarter, kind of how the other superstars do it around the NBA. Yeah, I think it was a lot that we learned, and I think that, Maria, you're spot on. I feel like Landry Fields, you got some work to do, Jack, because it's a lot of decisions that's going to have to be made with this roster, because I'm glad that they didn't do too well, like T talked about pre-show, because they say for some strange reason they want to say, hey, maybe we can make this work. No, you got to make changes, and you got to figure out and make sure you make the right decision, because there is something about what Trae brings to the table, and I feel like it's unmatched on this roster and in the rest of the NBA.
Yeah, and for me, I learned that you actually have some pieces that you could package up to maybe get one of those stars, so that you can maybe get a full-on big 3, should you be able to figure out how to keep Trae and DeJounte. And I think, too, we learned that the one move that Landry feels maybe his best move of all was Quinn Snyder, getting Quinn Snyder. So he's made one move. Now what you have to do is put that on repeat as it relates to getting the proper players around you. And like you said, it's become more difficult because of how others like Beat Krejci have shown out, like Bruno Fernando has stepped up to the table. And like you said, DeAndre Hunter has embraced his role coming off the bench. And embraced is an important thing, because none of us really kind of knew what that was going to be, or even a Kobe Buffkin finally healthy and we're able to see what the rook can do. So yeah, I think that this is going to be an interesting time, and also an interesting time because, like you said, Maria, it reminds us of the sample size that Quinn Snyder had of 22 games last year with the entirety of the squad. Then now he's had about a similar sample size of about 17 games or so, and he's able to look at this squad and say, oh, okay, well, this is what these players are able to do. And I think that's going to be important now that we've learned today that Jalen Johnson and Onyeka Okongwu essentially will not be back for the playoff run. Jalen, of course, left Tuesday's game. This was the one versus the Heat with the right ankle sprain. It was a re-injury for him, grade 2 lateral ankle sprain. He's not even going to be evaluated again until 3 weeks from now. Onyeka Okongwu, pretty much the same. He underwent a non-surgical procedure Tuesday for that inflammation in his big left toe. He won't be reevaluated for another 4 weeks. So I think that also puts some pressure on Landry Fields to figure it out, because now you're looking at the thing that's been the Achilles heel, that guy that can be a stretch and get out there and defend on the perimeter, shoot from time to time from the perimeter, and then come back and give you the defense under the basket. So Maria, how do you feel this news impacts what the Hawks are going to be able to do for a potential playoff run?
Well, I mean, these are two guys that were playing really well before they got hurt. And so obviously they were a big part of the postseason, of what you thought you could do in the postseason. And I think having them absent really does hurt the Hawks a ton. Also, they have to figure out what they do with Veet. It's Veet, Krejci. Krejci. They got to figure out what they got to do, because under the current CBA, he cannot play in the postseason until they figure out his deal.
Sunday.
So they're going to have to figure that out quick. And look, he's looked really great. He did last night whenever Trae came back. He's been a surprise piece for them. He's done a lot of very nice things, especially on the perimeter. He can shoot really well. So they do need to figure that out. And look, this is a big loss, because again, these are two guys who were playing really well. I think Jalen, as I've said before, is a secure piece of the future.
Yes.
So you're going to have to figure things out outside of that. But I think he's already solidified his role, so much so that I think his absence really does damage to this roster when he's not around.
Oh, indeed, because he's that guy who I think we all agree Trae's your most valuable player, because that's your franchise player, your superstar. But the guy who is your most important player by far this season has been Jalen Johnson. And Onyeka Okongwu, the one thing that I always say with him is he just shines when it comes to bigs. He absolutely can get in there with the best of the bigs in a way that Clint Capella can't quite, because he can go out to the perimeter and do some damage with those bigs that can go out to the perimeter as well. So yeah, I think those two losses really hurt.
Yeah, it just sucks, to be honest with you, because like with Trae coming back and looking like he did, and I just love his competitiveness, because when you think he was asked about, after the game about what was it like being on the sideline, he was like, man, it was awful. Like, I was ready to get back. And that just lets you know, like, he doesn't like watching from the sidelines. I love that. Like, guys who comfortable being hurt and being on rehab all the time, like, I don't really, rock with those guys long term. Guys who hate that stuff, they hate being in the tub, because the best ability is availability to me. Yeah. And for a guy like Trae to come back, and then his running mate, for most of the season, Jalen Johnson being out, and then you got Onyeka Okongwu, like you mentioned, T. He's a guy that can be a switch defender for you, on that perimeter. As far as with different wings in the league, that's a pretty decent matchup versus a mismatch with Clint Capella on the floor. So when you lose those type of pieces, it's hard to say, hey, they're going to be playing for the 8th seed against the Boston Celtics, and they could potentially move them to a 5th or a 6th game, right? Or that's not a possibility to me with those guys being out.
Indeed. And like you said, Maria, with no Sadiq Bey, like, we forget that he's done for the season as well, then you do have to really think of what you're going to do with Veet Krejci, because you do need some of that perimeter shooting, if nothing else. And he's actually kind of stepped up his two-way play too. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about whether there has been a shift in the NL East.